You did everything you were supposed to do. The degree. The job. The relationship that looks right in photographs. The apartment with the furniture arranged the way the magazines said it should be arranged. You made the list, and you checked off the list. And somewhere along the way you stopped checking whether the list was yours. This is the contradiction nobody prepares you for. It is entirely possible to succeed by every visible measure, and still feel like a stranger standing in the middle of your own life. Not depressed, necessarily. Not in crisis. Just quietly. Persistently absent from a story that has your name on the cover. The question this raises is not, what's wrong with me? That question assumes the emptiness is a malfunction. It might be something else entirely. A signal. A signal that somewhere between childhood and now, you built a life optimized for approval, rather than a life built on what you actually value. And those are not the same project, even when they look identical from the outside. So the real question is harder. Are you living according to your own values? Or according to a version of yourself that was constructed to be acceptable? Carl Jung had a word for the self we build for public consumption, the persona. Borrowed from the Latin term for a theatrical mask. The persona is the curated identity you present to the world. Competent employee. Supportive partner. Easygoing friend. Put-together adult. Jung did not consider the persona a lie. He considered it necessary. No society functions if everyone shows up entirely unfiltered. The mask has a job to do. The danger is not wearing the mask. The danger is forgetting you put it on. Jung described a specific failure mode, when a person over-identifies with the persona, mistaking the mask for the face beneath it. The competent employee becomes the entire personality. And whatever exists outside professional competence, the parts that are uncertain, unproductive, strange, unrefined, gets quietly disowned, not destroyed. Just pushed into what Jung called the shadow, the reservoir of everything about yourself you decided was unacceptable to show, or even to know. This is why a person can hit every external benchmark, and still feel hollow. The benchmarks were built for the mask. The hollowness is coming from the face underneath it, which has not been fed in years. There is a second mechanism running underneath this, and it is not mystical at all. It is measurable. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation, the tendency for the emotional boost from any achievement or acquisition to fade back to baseline, often within weeks. The promotion feels enormous for a month. Then, it is simply your job. The new apartment feels like a fresh start for a season. Then, it is simply where you live. This is not a personal failing. It is a documented feature of how the human reward system works. First observed in adaptation-level research decades ago, and confirmed repeatedly since. The mind is built to notice change, not to sustain appreciation of a static state. Once the new thing becomes the normal thing, the emotional signal that made it feel meaningful disappears with it. Combine this with a persona built on external approval, and you get a specific trap. A person who keeps reaching for the next credential, the next milestone, the next visible marker of a life going well. Because each one produces a brief spike of feeling real, followed by the same flat baseline as before. Not because the goals were wrong. Because the goals were never actually anchored to anything internal. They were anchored to the applause. This is where external validation and identity quietly merge into the same problem. When the persona has been running long enough, a strange inversion happens. You stop being able to tell your own preferences apart from the preferences you were trained to perform. Ask yourself honestly, do you want that career because it interests you? Or because it reads as impressive at a dinner table? Do you want that relationship structure because it fits you? Or because it fits the picture you were taught a stable life looks like? This is identity conflict in its most ordinary form. Not a dramatic rupture, but a slow erosion. where the self that performs and the self that wants become so entangled that separating them feels almost impossible. Most people never attempt the separation. It is easier to keep performing than to find out how much of the performance was load-bearing. Jung's answer to this was not to destroy the persona. It was a lifelong process he called individuation, the deliberate work of integrating the disowned parts of yourself, the shadow material, back into a coherent whole, rather than leaving them buried under the mask. Individuation is not self-improvement in the productivity sense. It is closer to an act of honesty. It asks you to look at the roles you perform, and ask which ones you would keep, even if no one were watching, and which ones exist purely for the audience. It asks you to notice the values you claim to hold, and check whether your actual decisions reflect them, or whether the values are simply the correct-sounding answers you learned to give. This process is uncomfortable by design. Reclaiming disowned parts of yourself means admitting the polished version was incomplete. But the alternative, staying fused to the persona indefinitely, is what produces the exact feeling this video opened with: a life that looks finished from the outside and feels unoccupied from the inside. Individuation is not a single insight. It is a practice. Here is where to start. First, list the roles you perform: employee, partner, sibling, friend, the version of you that shows up online. For each one, write down what it demands of you, and be specific. Second, list the values you would defend even if they cost you social approval. Not the values you'd state in an interview. The ones that would survive someone disagreeing with you at dinner. If the two lists, the roles and the values, don't overlap much, that gap is worth sitting with. It is not a flaw to fix immediately. It is information. Third, choose one decision, however small, and make it based only on the second list. Not the version that photographs well. Not the version your parents would approve of. The version that is actually yours. It does not need to be dramatic. It needs to be honest. The goal is not to discard the mask. Jung never asked for that. And neither should you. The goal is to know, finally, which face is underneath it, and to make sure that face still gets a vote.